you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, Jeremy Carnell and I are joined by Jeff Hamaoui, the co-founder and Chief Education and Innovation Officer at the Modern Elder Academy. And we're going to be talking about personal transitions, those life transitions that we all go through. And we start the conversation off with some really silly stuff about the transitions that we are all going through, Jeremy, myself, and Jeff, because we're all about the same age. They're both 50, I'm 49, and it does show on the video that I'm a little younger. You can just tell, 1 year makes a huge difference at this phase of life. It's the handsome factor is just off the charts. Anyways, I joke, I jest, and as you'll see, we kick this show off. There's a lot of zaniness that starts as we have the conversations about the things that dudes around the age of 50 have to go through and start dealing with. And by the way, ladies, I'm sure at around the age of 50, there's things you're dealing with too. So please do laugh at us at will as we're doing this stuff. But all joking aside, this is a really important and meaningful conversation that I really think is worth your listening or viewing here, because we're talking about some stuff that it matters, right? That you are going to make some transitions in your life. And some of them are just, you'll think, oh, that was just a professional transition, but how are you going to handle life after your business? How are you going to handle turning over a portion of your business to a younger advisor or somebody who's bought a portion of your business? And what are you going to do with your time? What do you want to do? Like all that type of stuff. We're going to be covering a lot of that in this episode of the show. So sit back and enjoy. As always, if you haven't done so already, please do make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, the YouTubes, if you like to see all the handsome in full effect. And who can blame you, right? We're there for you. And also, if you have a question or suggestion for the show, whether it be a topic or a guest, or you just want to reach out to us about this specific episode, please do send us an email, podcast@truelytics.com. Love to hear from you and get your thoughts on, did you like this episode? Or do you have any questions? You want us to cover more of this type of stuff? Was this helpful to you? Because we have a whole series on concepts of transitions planned and queued up here. And I think you're going to dig them. All right. Let's get to our conversation with Jeff Hamaoui of the Modern Elder Academy. Let's do it. Well, all right. Jeff Hamaoui, Jeremy Carnell, welcome to the octogenarian episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. And for anybody who's kind of taken aback by that, and they notice that, Mike, you can't possibly be an octogenarian, maybe septuagenarian, maybe. The old guy conversation we were having right before this really set the stage for our conversation today. I'm really thrilled with it. So, Jeff, live from Mexico with saggy eyeball syndrome or something like that going on there. How you doing, buddy?
I don't know how I'm supposed to be taken seriously by the financial community, Mike, if we start with my saggy eyeball, for goodness sake.
I think that's the perfect thing to start with for the financial community.
Well, listen, lots of people dream of like moving to, Southern California or Baja California, where you are, and because living life in the sun. And the thing they don't envision is finding themselves in a Mexican hospital dealing with eye issues. So I guess you're in a new club.
Seriously, and honestly, I'm 50 and I'm suddenly in the club where I've got like cataracts and eyeball challenges and saggy eyeballs, and it comes to us all, right? It's part of getting older, which is, I guess, part of what we're going to talk about today.
It's absolutely a perfect thing to talk about
today.
Mike,
what were you talking? You were talking about getting. What was it?
Oh, yeah, that's an exciting one. So those of you who haven't turned 49 and aren't approaching 50 yet, you are in for a treat when they tell you, hey, you got to go have the AMA, American Medical Association, now recommends anybody 45 and older have a colonoscopy. I'm like, well, that sounds exciting, So,
my one piece of advice as a man is never say to a woman, "I felt violated." It's the surefire way to get laughed out of it.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, whatever.
For sure.
Like, listen,
they're like,
listen, dude. It's brutal.
Exactly.
And so the funniest thing about it is, and everything they tell you is 100% correct. They're like, the preparation is worse than the actual experience, because in prep, you have to take the stuff that flushes your system out, right? And you're not allowed to eat anything basically for 48 hours or whatever before the thing happens. So you're hungry, you're completely flushed out. You've been, used the potty many, many times. And then, they give you, the drugs and so forth. They knock you out when this is happening. But when you come to, it's an experience, because you come to and all of a sudden I'm like swatting at my backside. And I go, Luna, stop it. I thought it was my dog. I thought I had fallen asleep somewhere. My dog was like messing with me, like, stop it. And all of a sudden it's the doctor like, well, Mike, your first colonoscopy is done. You're good to go. I'm like, it was kind of like the awkward, like, oh, he was pulling that thing out of my bum. That was
the knowledge you drop on people, Mike. I can understand why people listen to your podcast.
This is exactly right. This is going to be the most exciting one they've had so far. By the way, Modern Financial Advisor, you're going to be having this happen to you if it hasn't happened already. And, your clients are having this, so you can turn them onto this pod. They'll love it.
That's right.
And as we're saying, also now on the statin, which is an enjoyable, that's not that big of a deal. It's a once a day pill, but fun
that's
stuff.
Nothing. That's easy. Yeah.
Well, why are we kicking off this conversation talking about colonoscopies, saggy eye ball syndrome, or whatever the hell it is, and cataract? Well, it's because we're going to be talking a lot about transitions here, and what a perfect way. It could not have been more perfect. You're right, Jeff, to kick the show off about this because everybody goes through a transition at some point in time. And whether it's me approaching 50, Jeremy recently turning 50, and you mentioned you're 50 now, that is one. And that's actually what brought you to us. And I'll have you guys talk a little bit about that here. Because this is a bit of a special episode, right? Jeremy came on down to the organization that you run there, Modern Elder Academy in Baja, California. And it was so meaningful to him that he came back. It was like, I've had an epiphany. I got some new stuff. Let's talk about it. So maybe Jeremy, you can kind of introduce Jeff to the audience and talk a little bit about that and why you wanted to have Jeff on the show with us.
Yeah. So I had the privilege of being sent down to Baja to the Modern Elder Academy for my 50th birthday present from my wife, and ended up spending 3 of the 4 weeks of November, or sort of early to November, December in Baja. And 2 of those 3 weeks were at the Modern Elder Academy. And that's where I met Jeff. I think it was in the first week. I was there the week of November 9th. I was supposed to be the week earlier, but COVID stuff. And so it got pushed out. And I believe it was in one of the afternoon sessions that I was late to because of Jeremy. Like I'm never on time. And so I remember walking onto the patio because this session that Jeff was leading was in this building called Desierto, and this beautiful second floor patio it was just gorgeous. And so I show up, and it was even as far as pairing up with others to do, exercises, except for me. I was the odd man out. And so that's where I had the pleasure and opportunity of meeting Jeff for the first time. I'd seen him, I knew of him, but I hadn't had a chance to sit down and talk with him until that session. And it was great. I got to know him then, and it was and contextually relevant to this conversation. The session actually ended up introducing me to this notion of transition and providing me a lot of new perspective, some tools, and it was just he brought to life everything that I had been going through in my 40s. Like, I've gone through different transitions. I'm an entrepreneur. I've gone through, letting companies go, starting new companies, and I didn't have any of those tools. I didn't have any of that perspective, and I spent the better part of my 40s actually dealing with things I didn't understand. And all of a sudden, that conversation, that afternoon, getting to meet Jeff for the first time, getting those tools for the first time, was mind opening to me. And then it just occurred to me, I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'm the CEO of a company that's building an advisor transition management platform, and this is an aspect of transition we don't even touch. So here we are.
Yeah. So Jeff, I wonder if you could, because when you and I first met, when Jeremy brought us together and we had a bit of a prep call for this series that we're going to be starting here, and this is the first episode of that series, I promise they won't all have, colonoscopy conversations at the beginning, or maybe they will. If we get a lot of good likes on this one, maybe every single one will lead off with something like that.
Yeah.
But, I hadn't done much research on Modern Elder Academy. I had seen the impact it had on Jeremy, and I started kind of talking about it or asking you questions that were going down the wrong way, talking about leadership and so forth. And you kind of stopped me real quick and you said, Mike, we're really not talking about leadership here. We're talking about something different. We're talking about this transition into a new stage of adulthood, and I think is the way that you phrased it, or another phase of adulthood. And I wonder, so maybe if you could give us a high-level overview, the listener, a high-level overview of what you and the Modern Elder Academy team are doing there, and why it's so important for people now, like in today's day and age, to take this seriously and consider the things you guys are working on.
I think at like the most basic level, there's just some simple mathematics, okay? In 1905, your average life expectancy was 55 years old, okay? In 2005, that had gone up to 82. Let's call it 85 because I'm not numbers minded like everyone else on this podcast.
Yeah.
Essentially a doubling of adult life. We've gone in 100 years to living twice as long as adults as we used to. And there's not that kind of the corresponding infrastructure to help us think about what the hell do we do with twice as much adult life. Neither the social infrastructure nor the cultural infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, even the emotional infrastructure, right? You talk to people and there's still kind of that register that is 55 old? It doesn't feel old anymore, right? It doesn't feel old in the way when my parents were 55, I was like, dude, you're old, right? So what does that mean now, knowing that you're going to live another 30 years? And in a career, what does that mean? You're certainly not going to hang up your boots at 65 and say, okay, I'm just going to sit around for another 20 years. So what does that mean in terms of a portfolio life, in terms of living your career in a slightly different way? So what we do at the Academy is we create a space for people to come in and talk about those things, think about those things, and think about truly, okay, at this waypoint in my life, let's say at this midpoint of midlife, people that come to the Academy are between 40, 50, and 60. So it's in that range. 40 to 60 range is our sweet spot. We have people younger and we have people older as well. And it's literally giving them a breathing space to say, who am I right now? What do I care about? What do I want to do? And where am I facing change? And where am I facing the transitions that follow change?
I love that. I love that you point out that in your 50s, it doesn't feel as old as it used to be. Not only because I feel young still, except for things we talked about before, but I see pictures of my dad when he was my age. And I'm like, there's no way that he was as young and athletic and all the things that I'm doing and that I'm enjoying.
Handsome.
Yeah, well, that goes without saying. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. But I saw a picture of my grandmother recently passed away at 90, right? And so we could all be so lucky to live to 90 and so forth. But I got a picture of her with my great grandmother. I saw at the funeral. I was lucky enough to take it home from the picture wall. And I was looking at the picture. I'm like, oh, wow, what a wonderful picture. And then I realized, how old is my grandmother in that picture? And I look, and it was taken in 1982. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's like in her early 50s. Like she's like 52 or something like that at that age. And I'm like, oh, grandma was an old lady at a 50. Like, look at how old she looks, right? And then now, like,
right.
It's just like, my
You're
goodness.
just old forever.
Yeah, and so, but you're 100% right. It's different.
And that old forever thing is a real challenge, right? Especially if you look at the sort of the personal mindsets that go with that sense of like, I am too old to X, learn something new, do something new, be something new, go somewhere new, try something new that you have for yourself. The similar mindsets that the people around you have. So for example, your colleagues, your friends, your family, your kids, God forbid your kids, I'm going to go move to Mexico. And they're like, what? You're going to do what, Dad? Aren't you too old to do something like that? I mean, I literally refuse to spend my second half of adulthood being too old to try stuff. It just feels really compromising.
Right.
So
I love it.
we're faced, and also, lastly, sorry, the sort of societal, sorry, Jeremy, but the
No problem. No problem.
societal kind of narratives that we're facing. So not only are we like wrestling with our own, like, am I too old? My own mindset. We're wrestling with that sort of secondary tier, which is our kids, our family, our colleagues, our friends who are trying to
Yeah.
snap us into shape. And then there's that tertiary layer, which is like the societal kind of messaging that we're getting on television, on media, on social media. That's like, yeah, ask if you have children in your life or anyone near your life. Say, hey, show me TikTok, and watch them just laugh at you. You're too old for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Jeremy.
Yeah, no. What I was going to bring up, what I think is really interesting is, and I went through this process as I went to the Modern Elder Academy because I got hung up on the idea of elderhood, and I read Chip Conley's book, your business partner's book on the matter, and I've really grown my awareness around the whole concept of why it's important to begin to define elderhood for our segment of society. And what brought it home to me, and maybe you can actually get into more detail around the story, was when I heard about what was going on before the entire class of adolescence was defined, like before the notion of what it meant to be an adolescent existed, meaning that there was this, very young, that you had very little to no schooling. You got married early. You had kids really, really early. Like the fact that you weren't identified as an adolescent and that you were just grouped into this notion of really, there's being a child and an adult, and never the tween should meet in many respects was transformative for society, for how kids were looked at that time, how adolescents were looked at, and then what was afforded them from an education standpoint, etc. And that was just, it changed everything. And maybe you could explain, I'm doing a terrible job explaining it, but
no, I think you did a great
thinking
job
about it in that perspective, and then thinking about why then it's so important to then better define elderhood in the same cases is, I think, timely.
Let's pause. I just want to put a lens on the word transition. It's your business, Jeremy, and I want to just sort of. There's a great quote by a guy called William Bridges that wrote a book called Transitions. If you're interested in transitions, read the book Transitions. And the quote goes something along the lines of, change is what happens to you. He actually doesn't say this. He says, change is situational, transition is psychological. Okay? So let's break it down. Change. You get a divorce. You lose your job. You lose clients. Whatever the hell it is that's impacting you, that is a change. It might be external. It might be internal. You might be like, I'm done. I'm leaving this company. I'm leaving this job. I'm leaving this wife. I'm leaving this husband. Whatever it is, that is a change. The psychology of a transition is how you handle change. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, and we can get into what that actually means sort of downstream. But I really love that distinction that he makes. It's really helpful to sort of think about. We're not talking about change. We're talking about transition, which is how you deal with movement from one thing to another. So the movement from child to adult has this transitional phase that we've all lived it, right? We've all been teenagers and all the sort of terrible, interesting things that you go through kind of growing into your adulthood. Similarly, so there's a wonderful lady called Barbara Waxman who came up with this idea of middlescence. So you have adolescence, and then Bob Waxman came up with this idea of middlescence, where you go from being a young adult maybe to an elder. The word elder sits kind of strangely on a lot of people's shoulders. This idea is like, dude, I'm 50, I'm not an elder. Right? I know you felt that way. I know you both feel that way, right? But
absolutely.
Elder, me? I still do all kinds of awful things.
Listen, Jeff, come on.
But I think it's a really interesting idea right? I think it's a really interesting idea. And you mentioned Chip, and I think this has been one of Chip's kind of like mainstay ideas was like, what if we could take hold of that word and own it again, not as something that's like, if you think about your reaction to the word elder, that is the challenge that we're facing with age and aging. It's this sort of societal level, that triple threat. You, your friends, your colleagues, and the world telling you that somehow getting older and being older is a bad thing. So what, having that word elder in our vocabulary, saying, no, I want to own that word and I want to explore what it means to be someone who is elder, relatively elder than the people around me. Didn't love the word at first, have grown to really like it, have grown to really embrace it. So adolescence is that transition from child to adult. And midolescence is that transition from adulthood to elderhood, and that can be a sort of a very long time frame. Does that help? Is that right? Am I right?
Am I right?
Am I right or am I right? Right?
Did I get that right? I think I got that right.
I do dig it though. I really enjoy that phraseology, and also by the way, the appreciation of being an elder or somebody who has lived a little bit longer, right? And who has a little more experience or has made some mistakes, learned from them, and developed a new appreciation for things. My wife has been, she won't mind me telling this story. I won't name names, but she is on a new team at her company, and there's been some internal friction with some new members who are younger members of the team. Let's say there, and it's causing some challenges. Let's call it challenges. I won't get too descriptive, but what was really fascinating about it is hearing her tell the story. She's just venting. And I'm like, I've been around a while and I've seen that movie before several times. I've seen that type of employee behavior before. Here's what I'd advise to do. Like, we see this a lot, right? So I'd approach it this way, right? Because it's just, it's before it gets toxic and destructive, right? Because, I've been in the workforce for almost 30 years now, right? There's a lot of things that I've seen. And I think we could all attest to that. It's, very other areas of our life. So I love the fact you're saying embrace your elderness, if you will. I love it.
It's, and so let's bring this full circle, right?
Sure,
because we do have an advisor transition management platform. And the thesis that our solution tackles is the fact that, in the wealth management industry, the average age is 63, and a third are going to retire in the next 10 years. And myself, being an entrepreneur, I've gone through many business transitions, and I just know how emotional that was and is. And you couple then the idea then that, this industry is made up of 200,000 or so independent financial advisory firms. 180,000 of those are registered reps that have really treated this like a lifestyle business most of their lives. And it's a lifestyle business that probably a lot never really thought through as from a planned succession point of view. And here we are, they're approaching that age of retirement. So not only are they going to have to reconcile the emotional impact that they're going to have in potentially selling their book of business, selling their business, they're going to do it at the same time that they're facing this dynamic that, I'm 60 or 65, or now what do I do with myself? Do I stay on this? And what's interesting is that I saw this great study, FA Insights, Financial Advisor Insights. It's a trade publication, Jeff, in our industry. They did an mergers and acquisitions study group back in 2017. And you know what the number 3 roadblock was that was cited by advisors during a transaction that got in the way of it for a transition?
Nope.
The seller's inability to let go was the number 3 thing that got in the way of a successful transition in the wealth management space. And so they go on to say, listen, between a buyer and a seller, there's ways for them to seek alignment around the economics of the deal, around the risks associated with the deal, around strategic alignment and cultural fit. But the 2 things the buyer cannot ultimately reconcile, that's really going to be up to the seller, that they point out in this study, is ego and emotional ties. And so that right there, that you've got this massive transition happening in this very, this industry that's filled with these small lifestyle businesses that on average are, as far as an age is concerned, is around 63, 64. And this is the dynamic that gets in the way of successful transitions. That's sort of all of those data points are why I thought when you in your group, in your team, brought up the notion of transition quotient, I just thought that was so timely and applicable for the wealth management space. So maybe you talk about that. Like, it was your team that came up with the notion of transition quotient. I wrote an article about it that put it on a pedestal, but that's really your thinking. And I think it's important for everyone to understand it better because I think it's very timely.
I would definitely get there. You just said some really fascinating stuff that I just want to shine some light on before we jump.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely.
First of all, in preparation for this podcast, I watched a bunch of your other podcasts, and I've watched that average age creep up in each podcast that you mentioned. It's so funny. So in my notes, I had the average age is 62, and it's now clicked. It's up to 63,
but it's one of those.
It's one of those. I guess it's mathematical, right? Every year that goes by.
Yeah, the problem is that we started tracking that I think it was 5 years ago when it was 59. So I had been in the process of always saying it's 59, but it's no longer 59. So I've been trying to do better at getting to a more accurate.
And what's really interesting, just to layer on here, it's not just our conversation creep of the age. The industry has actually been struggling to backfill advisors with younger advisors. There actually is a struggle to recruit younger folks that have them view this industry as something that's attractive that they want to be a part of. And so that's a real issue. So that we are actually seeing the population age. That's a real deal.
Well, actually, and to that point, Mike, because I'm going through this on-ramp insurance accelerator, so I've been having a lot of time. I've been spending a lot of time with executives at Allianz and Securian, and they're bringing, and I know this is a dynamic on the asset management side and the wealth and advisory side, but it's particularly acute on the insurance side. It is typical, expected that you pass your book of business that you spend your whole life building down to your kids. And no one in this new generation or multiple generations, be it Gen Y, Gen Z, millennial, it doesn't matter. No one's interested. No one's taking. They're like, no, I don't want to be that. Like, from a generational perspective, there's a massive issue at hand that's emerging from just the normal sort of thoughts of secession down to then being able to recruit that generation into the industry, regardless of whether or not you're going to get handed a book of business from your dad or your mom. Like, it's a growing problem. Yeah.
So sorry to cut you off there or take you on a sideway there.
Yeah. Sorry.
No way. No. You know me. I'm like a train, man. I can keep going. I'm good. Okay, so I'm going to start in the wrong place so that I can end up in the right place in terms of this conversation. So the Stanford Center for Longevity did a bunch of research around what makes people thrive in midlife and beyond. So from that sort of 40 through the end of the game, what is it that makes people thrive? And it's pretty simple. They actually did some really great work in just boiling it down to three simple elements. The first is community, the community of people that you're with. That might be professional, it might be personal, whatever, but as human beings being in community as we age. The second is well-being, and they sort of divide that. It's a little bit of a trick. They divide it between sort of physical well-being and financial well-being, which honestly are the sort of two most uncontrollable factors as you age, as you well know, right? If someone's in their 70s and says, my financial well-being needs some work, you're like, oh, dude, we should have had this conversation 30, 40 years ago, right? And the third pillar is purpose. I think one of the things that you have to sort of really think about as you're looking at this kind of cadre of people in their 60s and 70s who are saying, okay, I'm moving on from this job, is that you are knocking at the foundations of two of their three pillars that are actually going to make them feel good as human beings as they age, right? A majority of their community is likely coming through their work, right? Their clients, their colleagues, the events that they go to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. their purpose is often service, right? To serve other people with their knowledge, with their understanding, and so on. So you knock those two out, and you're just left with one leg of the stool. It is not surprising that this is a sort of a wildly destabilizing um, occurrence. I again, in sort of reading your materials and watching a lot of what you guys talk about, the focus in that discourse, the focus in that discussion seems to be around it's transactional, right?
Yeah.
It's about retirement liquidity.
Mm.
So, dude,
Yeah.
I'm leaving my company. I spent a whole lifetime building it up. I need a couple of $1 million to kind of sign under everything
Yeah.
so that my financial well-being is looked after. And so that then the dynamic between the person taking it over is is around money. It becomes a
Yeah.
purely business
Mm.
negotiation. And I think what you're pointing to with this TQ, and I think what these three pillars point to underneath that, is the sense that actually there's these other types of liquidity, community liquidity and purpose liquidity, that we really need to think about, right? If
Wow.
someone
Yeah.
is transitioning away, or if the change is that they are no longer in their company, then what happens around purpose, what happens around community. Now, you can do things like go ahead and build a completely new purpose and a new community at 63,
Mm.
knowing that you've still got a 20-year runway, right?
Yeah.
This is still a big book of
Mm.
life that you can write in that remaining 20 years of for a totally new purpose. But I would challenge what you said, Jeremy, which is like people cannot reconcile this kind of you need to leave. And I would question that. I would really love to explore if there are ways of tapping into that wisdom. Maybe it's not maybe it's not linear, right? Maybe it's not like I set this company up, I remain in this company, because you can understand how the founder being with
Yeah.
the incumbent is going to be just a horrific nightmare. But maybe there's a sort of a lateral shifting. You know, I move out of my
Yeah.
company
Yeah.
and I go and advise in another company as a sort of an elder, essentially as an elder,
Mm.
all that experience and all of that other stuff. The other thing that you talked about that I thought was fascinating, I've never heard before, was kind of recruiting that second generation.
Hmm.
And I thought some of what I've heard you talk about in terms of the fundamental role has changed, right? So the
Yeah.
industry has faced a change, which is the role of the financial advisor has shifted from just being like, do X, Y, Z to what do you want? How do you want to get there? How
Yeah.
can your money serve you in that journey, kind of thing, right? It's far softer. Is that the right word? It's
Mm.
Mhm.
far softer of a profession than perhaps it started out as.
Yeah.
And again, there's a transition there. It's super fascinating, right? That sort of industry, the business you're selling is no longer the business that you were setting up, which is
That's
totally
right.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So I think with TQ, with transitional intelligence, what we're trying to point at is there is a describable arc. There is a journey that you go on. And again, there are some phenomenal books that are really worth reading. I mentioned William Bridges's book. Bruce Feiler wrote a book called A Life in Transitions, which is just another just terrific book, as well as some materials that we'll put in the liner notes, Mike,
Yeah.
that we've kind of created for people to download and start to sort of digest some of these thinkings.
That's
But
great.
there is a describable arc, okay? You start at the end, right? So
Yeah.
a change happens, a change occurs, something ends. That's what a change is. Something ends, okay? And you kind of go into this process of sort of dealing with that change. Often you go straight into denial, right? This isn't
Yeah.
happening. I don't want it to happen, which is what you were describing. You then go into this sort of messy middle. And in a messy middle, you're kind of looking for, okay, this change has happened. I'm in this mess. And there's this decision point, there's a point of inflection. Transitions are where growth happens for human beings. This is like such a profound point. Change is not what makes us grow, it's how we deal with change, right? And the risk that we all face in the face of a transition is going back to what we're comfortable with. So it's that sense of like just regression to type, regression to whatever we know. Oh, I've been a financial advisor for 40 years. What am I going to do? I'm going to be a financial advisor, right?
Right.
So that messy middle actually requires us to kind of put ourselves out into the world in a way that is supremely uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know who my community is. I don't even know what I'm going to be doing for the next 20, 30 years. Um, and it requires us to learn new stuff,
Yeah.
a degree of humility that maybe your career hasn't necessarily prompted for you, right?
Mm.
And then in that space, as you reconnect to your values, as you reconnect to the things that you're interested, then you start to find these threads. And then you can sort of say, okay, a new beginning. So you go from an end to a messy middle to a new beginning. And for most people that are listening to this, men or women, they're going to be fairly alpha personalities, right, from the business that they're
Mm-hmm.
in. They're going to start and say, okay, what's my purpose today? I just walked out of the company today, and what's the purpose
Right.
today? Without understanding that arc, without understanding that anatomy, it's almost impossible to realize that if I choose today what I want the next 20, 30 years to be about without transitioning, I will choose into what I know,
Mm.
which
Yep.
essentially means no growth, right?
That's right. It's the boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I found, right? When I've been going through the messy middle of any transition I've ever been involved in, I know that it's messy because of my self-imposed boundaries of who I thought I was or what I thought
Yeah.
I could do. And it was all predefined from, years of experience, years of success, years of failure. And to be like, no, this is who I am. I'm not anything beyond that. And man, is that limiting. And it's getting through that limit and it's breaking through those boundaries that I think then set you up for that successful transition over
Agree.
time. So yeah.
What's really interesting about that, Jeremy, you know, for our audience, for the advisors and executives who are listening or watching this, you're an embodiment of exactly what we're talking about from just who you are at Trulytics, right? Prior to
Yeah.
Trulytics, you were not a financial
No.
services wealth management executive. You were not a
No.
fintech founder for other startups, right? This was a big transition for
Very
you
much.
joining Trulytics at the early days. I remember our early conversations and you just like getting frustrated with the alphabet soup of the industry. There's RIA, there's registered rep, there's this, like, just going through the whole process of just trying to understand the industry
Yeah.
was really taxing to you and your, just like,
It was.
have I made the right decision here?
Right.
Type of thing. And it's natural for an advisor, as Jeff was mentioning, who has spent 20, 30, maybe even 40 years of their life growing their business. They've had some transitions in that business, right? Going from stockbrokers, as I often say and on the show, transitioning to what we now call financial advisors, building relationships with their clients and their clients' children and extended families in many cases, building relationships in the community where, Mike's the financial advisor that services, this community of people. Suddenly, as you were saying, Jeff, some of that is going to change. It can be fascinating. You can definitely understand why somebody's got some pause there, and they might be looking at kind of in the lines of this adulthood growing. They might be looking at 30 years of new in front of them.
Yeah.
Right. Because we were just talking about, if you were 63, let's just say it's 63 and you're thinking about exiting the business in the next couple of years, you might have another 30 years, 40 years to go potentially.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with yourself? Right.
And Mike, I wish it was just that easy. I wish it was just like, hey, you're moving out of your company and that's the transition that you're dealing with, right?
Sure.
Look at what we're dealing with in our 60s. Look at what people are actually facing. You are right in that absolute pressure point where you've got elderly parents, possibly, that you're looking after. So there are kind of all kinds of care issues, pressure issues, or loss of family issues, right? Maybe you've lost a parent or something like that. that is an incredibly powerful change, a disruptive change for so many people. And I know that's not universally the case, but
Sure.
that is something. You've got kids, oftentimes.
Mhm.
Maybe they're going to college, maybe they're just finishing school. There's a whole empty nest thing that's going on as
Yeah.
well. So it's not like you're just dealing with this one
No,
transition
that's
that
right.
you need TQ for. You might be dealing with four of them. We were laughing at the beginning of this podcast because I've got baggy eye and you've got bottom problems. It's it's kind of a joke. It's kind of funny, and but it's serious as well, right?
Yeah.
Baggy
Yeah.
eye and cataract means I've gone from being a person who lifelong loves driving to being the guy who, thank God, I live in a desert because I crash into frigging cactus all the time because I can't see that well out of my left eye. My wife has to drive me to and from things at
Wow.
nighttime. That is a change, right?
Yeah.
And I've got all of this kind of male ego stuff going on about, oh, I'm a really good driver. And I'm still there, right? It's like I'm a really good driver unless it's on the left. Right? So I may be going through a career transition, a physical transition. My parents, that whole deal. And so if you start to stack those transitions one on top of the other, you can see why it can also feel just so tremendously overwhelming. At 63, we're starting to see some of our friends die as well, right? It's like maybe
Yeah.
friends who are slightly older than us. There's a lot going on that
Yeah.
people are having to process. And I think having TQ is not just about me understanding my transitions and where I am. It's understanding the dimensionality of my transitions. I'm in several of them simultaneously. And then understanding how that impacts the people around me, understanding the other people in transition and what's going on with them. So if you're, let's say, in your 40s and you're watching a podcast like this, or in your 30s and you're looking at taking over a business from someone who's in their 60s, your TQ, your sort of transitional quotient and building that muscle is possibly less about you leaving a business and possibly more about how do I help this person have
Mhm.
the most effective emotional transition, right? There is a currency here that we're not talking about. It is
Right.
not about the exchange of money for the value that you've created. There is also this sort of purpose liquidity that I can help you with, this community
Right.
liquidity that I can help you with. And if we're clever, we can make it work.
And yes, and the financial advisors who are maybe the ones that are acquiring these businesses, it's also beyond just having TQ about that transaction. There's something or a lot to be said about just having TQ for your clients who
Yeah,
you're overseeing how many life transitions. I mean, that's your job in many respects. And having a
right.
high TQ just from the client perspective is going to pay dividends. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's so dimensional.
We've seen over 1,000 people come through the academy, and it is astonishing. I mean, we get sort of up close and personal with people. You'll hear
Yeah.
all
Oh, yeah.
kinds of things that they're going through, right? And even the most bulletproof people, I've just IPO'd my company, I've done this, I've done that. It's all singing and all dancing. My wife's a supermodel, my husband's an astronaut, whatever. They may be like absolutely golden in one domain of their life, and it's a total shit show in another domain of their lives. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's what's fascinating about this. There's a universality to it. We are all dealing with it. And again, Bruce Feiler in his book talks about he did a bunch of quantitative research. So if you're more numbers oriented, Bruce's book is really worth reading. He sort of interviewed thousands of people and he was trying to work out, so when do these changes come in people's lives? What kind of a frequency could we expect to see in a person's life? And what he came out with was he came out with a list of about 52 different potential changes that people will face across a lifetime, disruptors he calls them. And then he said, you can expect one of these based on his research once every year or year and a half, right? So people are getting slammed. These things, as I said, they overlap, they stack across the lifetime. If you're giving someone financial advice and you're not alive to the fact that there are these disruptors across different dimensions of their lives and that they are in transition, and you might need them to help you might need to help them adjust to those transitions. I think it's a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
That's really, I think it's really powerful to think about the fact that a lot of the people you're coming in contact with are dealing with some inflection point, transition point that you may not even be aware of, right? And,
Yeah.
and I love how you said that, even the most put together rock star type of person is dealing with some stuff. I always jokingly say, like, listen, everybody's mom drives them nuts, right? I don't care like how put together you think you are. Your mother calls or starts texting you, watch this person just start losing their mind. And you're like, okay, we're all human. We all put our pants on at a time, and your mom will fry your brain in a nanosecond. So everybody's got
Mike,
their
I
stuff.
love my mom. I don't know what you're talking about.
I love my mother too, but we jokingly say in my family that, like, oh man, we might leave her on the side of the highway if we have to spend time with the car with her for too long. It's just like, it's
Oh,
like
those
she's
family jokes.
she's like a professional. Like a professional annoyance artist. We only have a little bit of time left with each other, but I want to make sure we hit on this one thing that in our prep call you brought up, Jeff, and I thought it was really powerful, and it really does align well with everything that Truelytics is doing, is that how do you recognize when a transition is necessary, right? Because the path of least resistance is simply to stay with the status quo, and it's kind of what Jeremy was saying. Like, some advisors will back out of the deal for a succession plan or an M&A deal because they're just like, you know what? I'll just stay where I'm at, right? But at some point, for every advisor and every professional, a transition is going to be necessary. As I'm now becoming famous, at least in my own mind, for saying on this show, Father Time is undefeated, right? At some point in time, you're going to have to leave. You're going to have to make this transition, whether you like it or not. So what are some tips, if you will, or key lessons, maybe is the best phrase, for recognizing when a transition is necessary for you?
There's that quote that the pain of staying is greater than the pain of letting go, right? And I can't remember who said that quote, but it was probably Winston Churchill, Bob Marley, or I don't know. You work it out. It's one of those clever people. A clever person said, um, you know, the fundamental trick to all of this is how you pay attention to yourself, right? If it's not something that is actively shoving you out of the door, someone has bought my company and I'm done July 1st or whatever it happens to be. You know what I mean? If it is an internal sensor, then how do you pay attention to yourself? What are the things that you do to actually see where you are or how you're feeling about something? And in a lot of business podcasts, how are you feeling is not where we like to go, but how do you feel about something, right? What are the tools for that? You might journal. Start writing your thoughts down. Start asking yourself questions. Where am I right now? What do I want to be doing? How is this making me feel? How is this situation making me feel? How might I make that better, right? I don't know what it is that you do to pay attention to yourself. Find a way to pay attention to yourself. I don't know if that's exactly what you're going for, Mike, but that's essentially at that key point. It's like, how do I pay attention to what the hell is going on?
Yeah, no, I think I ended that article that I wrote about transition quotient, highlighting the need for mindfulness, as being part of. Well, again, not my audience was financial advisors, but it obviously applies to anyone. But the ability to be aware of everything, and that's so hard. Like when you don't have a mindful practice, be it yoga, be it meditation, be it journaling, then you so often will miss the here and now. And it's the here and now that is going to help you be able to assess maybe new opportunities that arise that are more interesting to you, maybe be able to recognize changes in family situations that are really important for you to be there, health issues, views on your business that you might not have. Maybe it's value or competitors or whatnot, but just having a mindful practice to drive awareness to then be able to assess those things that could pass you by otherwise is, I think, really sort of the secret to being able to understand when you need to begin to think about transitions, regardless of the transition, is having that awareness.
I love it. It's such what I thought was such a unique, or at least to me, a unique piece of advice, right? To hold up the mindfulness or paying attention to what's happening in your life and then reflecting upon it. I think we all kind of do that subconsciously, if you will, but what you're talking about is having a purposeful approach to that, right? Of looking at what's happening in your life, where you are you happy? Are you frustrated? Are you getting up and are you cranky every day, right? I always notice that there's something going on in my life. If I find myself just like losing my shit a little bit, disproportionate to what just happened, right? So if you find yourself just like really frustrated, like walking the dog as an example, and really frustrated that the dog is tugging on the leash a little more, and you start getting really just mad, and you're like, what's happening right now? And you realize, oh, I know why. I'm like cranky about getting this thing done or whatever,
Mike, and you're pointing at something really important. So Jeremy talked about mindfulness and awareness. I call it, how do you pay attention to yourself? It's the same idea. Really, that's where it goes from sort of crunchy granola to sort of crunchy, right? Which is like, where am I scared? Where am I fearful? Why is it so hard? Because it's not about you if you're 63 and you don't want to leave your company, because this is the key issue. It is clearly a commonly shared issue. What is it? What is it that is fearful? Dude, it's that I'm letting go of two of the pillars that I know are going to make me happy. And I don't know what's going to replace them. So what is it that's making you scared? Where are you comfortable? That's another great question to explore into. Where am I comfortable? I'm getting lots of recognition, getting lots of money. I may not be enjoying this much anymore, but dude, I get this other stuff. So that's another. And then the other big thing is, where do I have a fixed mindset? If I stop this, I won't be able to X. Start monitoring those mindsets. Where are those mindsets that are saying to you, there is nothing beyond this? And really examine those and really challenge those, right? By the way, just for the record, being scared, being stuck, and having a fixed mindset is the definition of an arsehole, right? So are you an arsehole? Have you become kind of an arsehole? And how do you pay attention to that? I'm deadly serious, right? I am deadly serious. Yeah.
Well, are you an asshole? This is a great way to start wrapping things up. You know what's really funny?
Just go to Mar-a-Lago to get a real life example of this.
We started out with talks about now we're finishing on what's really one of the things you hit there, Jeff, and this is a great way to wrap things up is, we talked at the beginning about how being in our 50s, let's say, feels younger than it did for previous generations. And it is in many ways, right? For a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the things that's so important, and I hope this is a key takeaway for those watching or listening, is one of the other ways in which being alive today has changed than it was 40 years ago is that it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be afraid and be vulnerable and admit those things. Whereas before you had to have that veil up. Men weren't supposed to be showing their feelings or talking. Like your modern elder academy experience would have been like, are you kidding me? 40 years ago for a lot of people. Like, I'm not going to go to a place where we're all going to sit around and share our feelings. Are you serious? All right, and talk about that stuff and talk about how to deal with things. You just dealt with things, right? Supposedly, we know that wasn't actually happening. But I think it's just so important now that people have the opportunity to do it, and it's welcomed. It's welcomed that you have these conversations.
And it's beyond just talking. It's give yourself the space to think. That's what I got out of it. I got 3 weeks of space to be able to really assess what I was doing in my life, where I thought it was going, and some new perspective that, again, had I not given myself that space, I never would have met Jeff. These concepts, these tools just never would have surfaced. So
fantastic.
And the new community, right? Let's
yes.
talk about those pillars. A new community of people who are going through the same stuff, who maybe have insights for you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Jeff, I know we're going to have you back on the show, I'm sure, many, many times, and this is kicking off a series. But I'm sure some of the folks,
if we don't get too many complaints.
Hey, listen, we control the show. They can complain all they want. I welcome any feedback. If you want to send feedback, it's Jeremy at
especially about Mike's butt.
Exactly. I should have taken some selfies of me laying down. It would have been great. I'm sure some folks are going to want to follow up on some of these topics. We're going to have plenty of links in the show notes, the blog post that goes up with this, with the books that you mentioned, also links to the Modern Elder Academy and your LinkedIn profile and the like. But what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you, Jeff, if they want to inquire a little bit more about things you talked about today, and if they're interested in having a similar experience that Jeremy had with the Modern Elder Academy?
Go to the Modern Elder website, mea.com.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Or Modern Elder Academy. Gosh, did I just get my website wrong?
It'll be linked.
God.
Somebody's out
I don't do the
MEA.com,
technologies, you kids. The Modern Elder Academy.com.
MEA.com is like something about methamphetamine something. I don't know what's going on.
That academy's amazing.
This is a mess. They're all just like getting high as fuck. Anyway. No wonder they think they're getting their life together.
I love it.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you joining us all the way from Baja. And Jeremy, thank you very much for putting this together. Wonderful to see you, gents. Let's get our wine on, everybody, to the wine.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see you. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. I hope you had as much fun as we did. Hopefully you laughed and chuckled along the way and maybe took some notes about things you should be thinking about as you go through your transitions, or the people around you in your life are starting to go through transitions. You know, as Jeff mentioned, the average person is going through a transition a year, right? It makes sense, right? There's all sorts of stuff happening in your life, and thinking about it actively and being mindful that, you know, you should put some strategies in place to handle those transitions. It's important stuff, right? So if I could ask one thing of you before I let you go, make sure you share this episode with a friend or a colleague or family member even. I know this is the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, but a lot of the stuff we covered here is applicable to anyone. And I think it's really important stuff. And I hopefully you agree. Huge props to Jeff Hamaoui from the Modern Elder Academy for joining us. Thank you very much, Jeff, for all the wisdom and the lessons you shared with us today. I'm looking forward to having you on the show many, many more times in the future. And frankly, hopefully some of those many times include us all together having that glass of wine and clinking the glasses and seeing if we can kind of ratchet the comedy level up, 3 or 4x. That would be really good stuff. Okay. All right. Until next time, please be safe. Get out there, have a good time, but not too good of a time, right? Just because you've been cooped up in the house for a year and a half wearing a mask and you're now all vaxxed up, you can go out and be amongst the people again. Keep it legit. All right. Be nice to people. All right. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.